again, welcome to BNC Live. I'm Brittany Jones. Topping our news tonight, it's a parent's worst nightmare to lose a child, and tonight a family is grieving after the search for their missing loved one comes to a tragic end. The body believed to be of missing college student Mia Marcano was discovered today in Orlando. The 19-year-old was last seen alive at the apartment complex where she lived and worked. A maintenance worker who police considered a prime suspect, took his own life just days after Marcano disappeared. BNC has been following this story, shedding light on missing persons cases in Black and brown communities. Our Stephanie Bertini is live in Orlando, where the family of Mia Marcano is now faced with her tragic loss. Stephanie, good evening.
Good evening. It's a reality no parent wants to face. The heartache heavy. So timeline, it's clear something terrible happened to her right around that time.
And Steph, the details of this story obviously very heartbreaking, but of course, with the prime suspect dead, getting answers to all of the questions now left behind has to be tough for the family and law enforcement as well.
Well, law enforcement has said there's no other suspect. They don't believe anybody else was involved in her disappearance, and now we know in her death. So clearly it will be difficult for the family to get all the answers they want and need for true closure. But surely we can understand nothing will change what they have to live with now. She's gone.
Yeah, definitely. My prayers definitely go to them. BNC Stephanie Bertini live for us in Orlando. Stephanie, thank you. Well, hundreds of women gathered in our nation's capital, taking a stand in support of reproductive rights. More than 600 cities across the country holding rallies for abortion justice today. This just weeks after the most restrictive anti-abortion bill went into effect in Texas last month. Now, the Texas bill bans abortions after 6 weeks in a woman's pregnancy, with no exceptions for rape or incest. The Supreme Court, which returns Monday, denied a request to block the Texas bill, and activists now fear it will empower other states to follow suit. The Women's March organized the rallies in partnership with more than 90 groups, including Planned Parenthood, Federation of America, and the Center for American Progress. One of those rallies was held in Charlotte today. Our Janine Donaldson is live in Charlotte. And Janine, advocates say we should be able to make the decisions. Good evening.
Good evening, Brittany. People here today tell me they're working to prevent the country from going 50 years, and the rallies are great, but nothing will change unless people vote and support lawmakers that uphold their values. Brittany?
Well, Janine, we know this is an ongoing story. BNC's Janine Donaldson live for us in Charlotte. Janine, thank you. Well, the rally for reproductive rights is not just a heterosexual issue. Up next, how this could also impact the LGBTQ community. You're watching BNC Live. Stay with us. Welcome back to BNC Live. As hundreds of thousands of women marched in support of women's right to choose, one community's voice often goes unheard. Abortion rights is an issue that not only affects heterosexual women, it also impacts the LGBTQ plus community. And joining me now is Kiera Johnson, Executive Director of the National LGBTQ Task Force. Kiera, thank you so much for being with us tonight, and welcome to BNC.
Thank you for having me.
We are happy to have you with us, and we know you got the opportunity to be out in D.C. during the rallies today. So first off, tell me about your experience at the rally.
Yeah, it was a powerful experience and a beautiful one as well. There was a diversity of folks out there. There's a lot of love and a lot of hope, but also a lot of power, right? Mm-hmm. People who know and understand the importance of having agency over their bodies. But also the importance of being engaged, politically, right, and understanding our power in the legislative, right, sense of our community.
Yeah, and so talk about that. You know, so many people don't really know how many levels this hits on, right? So how does abortion rights actually affect the LGBTQ plus community?
I really appreciate that question. I think oftentimes people don't understand or realize the complexities and diversities of the LGBTQ movement. For instance, bisexual folks are among the largest, right, group of folks and growing in our community. But this is also beyond a question of whether abortion or the importance of abortion access. It's about bodily autonomy. It is about fighting, right, for the right to not have government decide how to control our bodies, right, at will. And whether you're a Black woman or you're an Indigenous person or you're an immigrant or you're a queer person, we all, right, have experience with people trying to control our bodies, right? And it's about how do we wrestle that control back.
Yeah. And what has been kind of what you guys have gotten so far when you went out to that to the rally today and you heard so many people get an opportunity to share their voices, make sure that their voices are heard? What is the consensus that, it seems like that your voices aren't being heard at this point, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and what I think is so critical is that we are we are not going to stop. And I think that's what the energy was.
Mm.
We have seen a history of oppression and dominance, and government trying to control our bodies, from forced sterilizations in Puerto Rico to being made to have sex and have babies, coming off slave ships, right? Like it is not new, and we are not going to stop because we know that our humanity is tied to controlling our own bodies. I mean, we are literally talking about, opponents of abortion rights who are also denying lesbian couples, gay couples from being foster parents and adoptive parents. Like, this is bigger than abortion. This is really about control over our bodies, because whoever controls the body controls the land, right? And governments know that, right? And you could feel it out there. The number of Black women who came from Pennsylvania and Atlanta, the Indigenous women on stage, the gay men like walking through the crowd chanting. That's a hopeful, beautiful place.
Yeah. And you talk about this law and the big changes happening in Texas and then also on the board, Mississippi. The law also impacts women who are victims of rape or incest. For those who are actually in bisexual relationships, how would this impact them?
This law is just another, right, act of violence on women of color's bodies. Right. So this is, denying women humanity and economic stability. This is denying regular health care and access to quality health services. This is the denial of our people being threatened to take away our right to vote. So this is yet another attack. Right. And it means families could be destroyed. The reality is that most of the women who have had abortions also have children, right? We are making decisions in the context of our families. We are making decisions in the context of our communities. And when we break that bond, it has a ripple effect on our economic stability and the power, right, and wholeness of our communities.
And Kira, share some of the stories that you've heard from women that are part of your organization who actually have suffered from being victims of this, of basically trying to move forward and they're feeling like they're being blocked from being able to make that family because of a result of the government.
Oh, wow. I came from a reproductive health and rights background, and started working in the LGBTQ movement a couple of years ago. And one of the things that is undeniable is the need to be seen as human when you walk into a hospital office, when you walk into a clinic. And we need to be, our whole selves need to be seen, right? Not through lenses of stereotypes and assumptions, right? And we've heard so many stories where people don't get the care they need because they aren't being, right, considered as whole people. I know women who were victims of violence, right? Who ended up having to have children, from the yielding from a violent attack. But I also know couples, right? Lesbian couples who have tried to adopt children or tried to access, assisted reproductive technologies who were denied the right to build families, denied the right to give a child sitting in foster care a home, right? So again, the reproductive justice piece, it is both about, right, whether or not we have access to abortion, but it is about our whole reproductive lifespan, right? From accessing contraception to having children when we want to, in the way that we want to, and then who knows, maybe having a tubal ligation when we're really done, right? But who gets to decide that? Our governor, our Congress? We're going to leave that decision up to a judge? That's not the place where these conversations should happen. And the best decisions never happen there. It happens in the family and in the community.
And Kira, now that the spotlight is actually on this issue, how do you perceive this issue helping women who have long fought for the rights? Do you think we're going to see some actual change since so many people are now raising awareness to the issue?
I hope so. I saw a sign out there today that said, "My arms are tired. I've been holding this sign since the 1960s." I was like,
Wow.
oh, that's sad and a really funny, fantastic sign. My mom is in her mid 60s. She's been fighting for this since she was a teenager, much in the same way that she's been fighting for civil rights since she was a teenager. I think we have an opportunity. I think we can do it if we are fighting at the intersections, right? We're taking racial justice into consideration. We're taking economic justice issues into consideration. We are taking reproductive health and rights into consideration. We've got to bring the whole person into the organizing. We got to bring the whole person into the advocacy. And this is a new day, right? I see that kind of intersectional work happening at the state level, at the local level, and definitely at the federal level. Civil rights organizations, immigrant rights organizations, women's rights organizations coming together to fight across different issues, fighting to expand civil and human rights, abortion rights, voting rights, justice and policing, et cetera.
And I mean, now that so many people, like I said, all eyes are on it, people are talking about it, and I'm pretty sure our lawmakers are listening. Well, Kira, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. We appreciate your time tonight. And stay with us, much more BNC Live after this break. Welcome back to BNC Live. Well, this week, Congress might have avoided a government shutdown, but come early December, they will be faced with the same issue. The House passed the stopgap funding bill extending government funding through December 3rd. But how does a government shutdown actually impact Black and Brown communities? We turn now to Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor from Brown University, for more on this. Dr. Collins, welcome back. It's good to see you this Saturday.
Oh, thank you, Brittany. Happy to be here.
So, Dr. Collins, we hear about the potential government shutdowns all the time, and it somewhat kind of becomes a little bit numb to us. But there could be some real consequences for people who look like you and I if it were to happen. Talk about that.
Well, it could affect us in a number of different ways. I'll start with the direct impact that it has for federal employees. And so, in 2013, we saw the damage that something like a government shutdown can really, really do. So in 2013, you had about 800,000 federal employees that were furloughed, over 1 million federal employees that were working without pay. Now, when you think about who composes the overall sort of body of federal employees, a lot of Black folks, a lot of Black and Brown folks. So about 18% of federal employees are African American, and then another 8% are Latinx. And so you're talking about a sizable portion. What the federal shutdown also does is, to the extent that it does enable federal employees to remain paid, there's a cutoff where the first people who are on the chopping block are what they consider non-essential federal employees. These are folks like our brothers and sisters that work at the TSA, who are working at airports and are, again, federal employees, but considered non-essential. And they're the first on the chopping block when it comes to time to not only take away paychecks, but ask people to work for free.
So I mean, obviously it impacts people and their families at that point, because without being able to have that money coming in.
Absolutely. And then if you're on any kind of federal program service, this could affect you as well. Now, so when we see a partial shutdown, this doesn't mean that, okay, I'm enrolled in Medicare and my access to Medicare is going to stop. But what it does mean is that if there's any kind of administrative error, let's say you recently moved and you need to file a change of an address, or maybe your check was mailed to the wrong address and you need some sort of clerical error fixed or sort of approved. When we have a government shutdown, there are no government employees in the offices to actually fix these problems. So things will work well for the people who are enrolled in federal programs as long as those things are running smoothly. But if there's any hiccup, you could see a direct impact on, again, your ability to access your health care, your ability to access unemployment benefits, your ability to access any kind of support or subsidy that is being granted to you through a federal program. This could immediately be snatched away if there's any kind of hiccup.
And Dr. Collins, we know it can kind of get also expensive. So who's impacted by the cost of these shutdowns the most? The Congressional Budget Office found that a partial shutdown back in 2019 cost the economy about $11 billion. I repeat, $11 billion. Does that take away from money from much needed programs, especially when it comes to our Black and brown communities?
Absolutely. You know, if you look at what is on the legislative agenda for Congress and President Biden, what's laying in the background is the big infrastructure bill. And a big component of the infrastructure bill is investments in anti-poverty programs. And these are programs that are particularly important for our communities. Now, if we get bogged down in a government shutdown and end up having to spend so much money back paying essentially debt that we accumulate through allowing the shutdown to continue, this weakens our ability to invest in the kinds of anti-poverty programs that we're going to be seeing centered in this infrastructure bill discussion. And so, you know, what happens with the government shutdown, if it's possibly sort of put back on the table, if it's extended, and especially if it turns from a partial shutdown to a full shutdown, this could be something that we're paying the price for years to come.
And what about how can our communities prepare for a possible shutdown, if there's anything they can do, especially with December 3rd just 2 months away?
I think if you're a part of any kind of federal program, make sure that all of your information is up to date. Make sure that your address is properly on file. Make sure that there are no issues with the contact information, your telephone number, again, proof of address. Make sure that every information that is needed for the federal government to get in contact with you or be able to deliver any kind of good or service that you're receiving, make sure that that information is up to date. Also, you know, do what we do best in our community, which is look out for our own. If you know folks in your family, a lot of us have family members who are federal workers and may be on the cusp of a furlough. Make sure that we're looking out for them, protecting their best interests, making sure that they're safe both mentally, financially, and just in terms of their overall mental health.
That is a lot of good advice there. So how does this actually impact, you know, the impact of a shutdown actually affect someone like you if you're a new parent?
Yeah, for me, it impacts me as a new parent in a number of different ways. You know, I have a 4-month-old baby, a daughter, and you know, for her, I have to think about some of the public spaces that we like to occupy, especially during the pandemic. We love to go to parks. We love to go to, or at least, you know, try to go to, you know, the zoo, museums, you know, different outdoor spaces that allow us to be safe while still exposing our baby to a lot of the beauty of our environment. But when government shutdowns are put on the table, a lot of the government, the public facilities are forced to close. And so this really places a restriction on the ability for myself and my wife to be out in our community and expose our daughter to some of our surroundings, which is really key to her, you know, her development, especially at this stage.
Yeah, it definitely is. It takes me back to when I was a kid, and we know the impact that it has on our lives, just being able to see those things. Well, Dr. Collins, we know we got to make sure they get it right. Like I said, December 3rd is around the corner, so hopefully they do. We appreciate your time tonight. Ahead in sports, a SWAC football coach taking us inside the huddle for an update on his team. Plus, Find out what Major League Baseball role model is tonight's King of the Hill. James Hill is up next with BNC Sports. Welcome back to BNC Live. Well, whether you work in an office or are working remotely, you've probably had this conversation with at least one of your coworkers by now and have asked the question, are you willing to leave your career because you have opted not to get vaccinated? Well, frontline workers, we're talking about professionals from doctors to nurses to teachers, are making that choice. It's Self-Care Saturday on BNC, and our mental health and wellness expert, Jane Marks, breaks down the mental health impact of leaving your career. Well, Jane, thank you so much, obviously, for being here with me for Self-Care Saturday, as always.
Well, you know, we love Self-Care Saturday. It's a time to reboot, recharge, come up with ideas that we're going to put into place next week.
Yes. So, Jane, obviously, very, very important subject and also a very touchy one today. We're talking about people who have been in their careers for more than 20 years, willing to walk away or have already walked away at this point because they are afraid of getting vaccinated or they've opted not to get vaccinated. But what type of mental impact does it have on someone who's grown to love this career and then ultimately walks away?
Think about it. That is a huge decision, Brittany. I think to make that decision, hopefully, you know, they have really thought clearly about it because the consequences are enormous. People in careers that they love, first of all, you lose your sense of rhythm. You know, in other words, that's just part of how your life unfolds on a weekly basis. You know, at a certain time you get to work, you lose your network of people who've been there for you and those that you've helped, again, you've shaped some of their careers. You lose your sense of place and purpose, not to mention the financial aspects as well as, you know, the healthcare benefits. But I think most importantly, I think people don't recognize how much job plays into their identity in terms of who they are. And particularly, you know, I think of physicians or nurses. That is who they are, nurturers by nature. And so suppose you quit and you've been so thoughtful, you're so exhausted, you still got to be really mindful of what this is going to mean to your life. And if there's a history of mental health issues in your family and you become more isolated because you're not working, you're at risk for significant anxiety and depression.
Wow, that's so interesting. And you mentioned earlier too, even routine. You start to adapt to a certain routine as well.
Well, you live a routine. It's not even adapt. Remember, historically, if you've been in a job for 20 years, you are very accustomed to that. That's just part of how you manage your day. And then when all of a sudden that happens, and that's what I tell patients, listen, if you're going to make a decision like this, make sure you're very mindful of the consequences. You know, I forgot to mention the financial swift changes that it makes, that without that, you know, without that 60 or 70% income that you, particularly if you're in a two-person family, if you're a single person, you know, hopefully you have made enough plans so that you can sustain yourself over time. But then what about situations? I think a huge question you have to ask yourself, and I always ask patients, will you be able to get unemployment? You know, these are basic security and safety needs that you need to be mindful of. So it is a huge decision to decide to quit after those many years. And, you know, of course, because of your feelings about vaccines. But, you know, let's face it, we're a divided nation, and, you know, people are going to have two very different responses to this.
And let's talk about someone who obviously, after a person makes this decision, I mean, I would think that there would be some whole new level of self-care that you would need, right? So what are some of the things that they need to look at doing just to kind of keep their mental health in check after they've made this decision?
Well, perhaps some of the things they had not been able to do, they'll be able to do at this point. One of the most important, of course, is sleep hygiene. You know, you must get sleep because that puts you more at risk. You must be very careful about your diet during this time. And most importantly, you are at risk for substance abuse. And so, again, as you make this decision, self-care should be about physical exercise and meditation if you can. And also, you need to be looking for another job. That's part of self-care. Actively looking for a job, actively looking at your networks, actively looking at your resources to make sure that you can move along this and you don't get stuck. Because getting stuck, again, puts you more at risk for mental health, you know, dynamics.
And Jane, even if you take the vaccination out of it, just have you ever had any of your patients tell you that they've experienced this, that they just want to walk away and don't know how to deal with it mentally?
Absolutely. I've had many patients just walk away, and the ones that walk away, unfortunately, they did it in a way that it was a very impulsive choice as opposed to a mindful choice. So that's why I'm always saying be very measured about your decisions, because there was so much regret. There was regret, there was guilt. Some of them found themselves calling themselves, you know, I'm not a quitter. Why did I do that? In other words, they're second guessing themselves after they had made that decision. Now, on the other hand, there are those that said this was some of the best things they ever did. They felt relief. They felt like a sense of peace, and they felt a sense of well-being, and they felt like even though there was no safety net whatsoever, they knew that it was a smart choice. And the one smart thing that most of these people did who felt good about it was they had strong family supports behind them, and families just couldn't witness them go through this over and over again.
So lastly, what is your self-care tip for the week?
Let's see. My self-care tip for the week, Brittany, would be this. I think it's so important for us during these uncertain times to stay in the present, be mindful and stay in the present. So many things can happen on a dime at this point, and if we can take the time to savor those moments, because we're going to have good ones. We're going to have tough ones, but we're going to have good ones. You know, whether it's a meal, whether we're tasting, you know, the textures. I mean, just enjoying a meal or enjoying a moment or going outside and thinking, you know, this is fall, this is the weather, but staying present as much as you can, because, you know, basically we've been on autopilot for so long. We need to have those special moments to recharge and reboot, just like we talk about every Saturday.
All right, Jane Marks, mental health and wellness expert. Thank you so much, Jane, because I know so many people are talking about this right now.
Absolutely.
Teacher of the Year is our BNC King of the Hill.
And the fact that he remains in that position as the only black manager, he's still making history.
History in the making, history in full effect, walking history book, a phenomenal human being and a wonderful skipper, as it were, and his team is still alive. They would love to hoist a trophy at the end of the year.
All right, thank you, James. We'll be right back with much more after this break.
Through Tuesday, that's when those rain chances bump up. The clouds do stick around, and the rain chances are going to stick around as well. But for you all in Philadelphia, one more day, temperatures in the 80s, and of course peaks of sunshine as we head into Monday. 60% chance of rain, Britt.
Well, listen, if they're getting lucky with the weather, maybe they can get lucky with Powerball tonight.
Yes.
Yes. All right, so lucky winners. Who's ready for tonight's Powerball?
Me.
I know we should get a ticket. I always forget, but you still have a little time to get your tickets. Listen to this. You have the opportunity to win about $635 million.
What?
635, yes ma'am. Tonight's Powerball is potentially the 10th largest in U.S. lottery history. If a winning ticket is sold, the jackpot would be the 6th largest in Powerball history. Apparently, the cash value of one winning ticket would actually be $450 million. The last time a winner matched the 6 draw numbers was in June, and now the jackpot has grown with nearly 40 drawings. You know, they cost $2.
Yeah, Britt, well, you know, I think there's a time limit on it, so I need you to do the weather next segment.
Okay. All right. We hope you get lucky. Go get your ticket fast, 1-2, so we can win the money. Stay with us. We'll be right back with more news after this. And weather.